never had a family.
I can be your family.
You wouldn't be my family. You'd be my lady.
King Gendry was wandering about the royal apartments. As he took in the room, he realized that this is where his father had once slept. Gendry's warhammer stood, propped up against the bed. A soft knock at the door, and Gendry turned to face it.
You summoned me, Your Grace?
Stated Arya as she entered the room. I did, replied King Gendry. Arya strolled around the room, also taking it in. She tried to pay King Gendry little attention, fearing their relationship may change now that he is king. Arya, stated Gendry, slightly perturbed. Arya slowly turned to face him.
Yes, Your Grace.
She said formally. Gendry took long steps and stopped close to her. He embraced her arms with both hands. His face pleaded to her. Please don't call me that when we're alone, Gendry asked.
That a command? Will we be spending a lot of time alone? Will that be another command?
Asked Arya defiantly. I had an idea, stated Gendry.
Ideas are better than orders.
Arya answered. I would like you to take command of the Kingsguard, the first appointment of a woman in Westerosian history, Gendry stated.
Why are you asking?
Questioned Arya. You strike me as one who doesn't do well with commands, tradition, or rules, Gendry replied.
You know me better than most.
Arya replied. So you're considering the appointment? Asked Gendry.
No. I want to sail, explore, and see the rest of the world.
Answered Arya. I figured as much, said Gendry. This confused Arya, as she did not know why he would then appoint her. The first mission of the Kingsguard will be to serve as emissaries to all the leaders of the known world, and the unknown lands. Gendry paused. Arya was silent as Gendry continued. The Night Queen, the White Walkers, and the Army of the Dead still exist, and will all need to band together again, should they come, finished Gendry.
And you thought your offer would entice me?
Said Arya with a fake annoyance. Gendry stood confidently over Arya and said, Yeah, it does. Arya grinned as a relief came over Gendry, and Arya returned his embrace.
Congratulations, by the way.
She said to him. I only have your brother to thank, said Gendry. Arya turned to face his bed as she continued to speak.
Who will you entertain here while I'm gone?
Asked Arya. It's likely to remain lonely while you're at sea, replied Gendry.
And when I return?
Asked Arya. That's entirely up to you, quickly replied Gendry.
Smart. Not proposing just now. You do know me better than most.
Arya grinned as Gendry stepped forward and kissed her. So you accept? Asked Gendry.
I will.
Replied Arya. Gendry lifted her off the ground and spun her around the room.
This doesn't make me your queen.
Demanded Arya. Then I will not take one, said Gendry. You know the historical significance of your wolf's name? He asked.
Nymeria, warrior queen.
Answered Arya. She looked impressed as Gendry was inferring this. I asked Sam, said Gendry with a chuckle. Another knock at the door was heard. Your Grace? Asked Tyrion Lannister. My Lord Hand, replied Gendry as Arya distanced herself from him. Gendry appeared to have noticed her return to formality. I was hoping to discuss judge selection for my sister's trial, Tyrion stated. Still scheduled for dusk? Asked Gendry. If it pleases, Your Grace, replied Tyrion. Yes, it does, stammered Gendry. I was thinking of a mixture of geography and exposure to Cersei. Tyrion replied. I agree, said Gendry. North, west, and south? Asked Tyrion. Yes, of course. And as far as exposure or experience? The king asked. I was considering someone who has known her for a lifetime, someone just as the queen, and another who knows little to nothing of her, replied Tyrion. Gendry paced around the room as Tyrion poured the king and himself a drink. Arya refused Tyrion's offer and excused herself from the room.
Your Grace, I wouldn't refuse tasking as the executioner for this trial, if need be.
Arya said as she closed the door. This snapped Gendry out of his concentration. With a trial of this magnitude, and your lack of exposure to her, you could easily chair this trial, Your Grace, reaffirmed Tyrion. I will, Gendry paused. Well, that leaves 2 more appointments, and I believe them to be obvious, Gendry finished. Your Grace, asked a questioning Tyrion. You and Sansa Stark, Gendry offered. It does meet all the prerogatives, replied Tyrion. You're settled then? He asked. I am. Please see to it, asked Gendry. At once, your grace, said Tyrion, with a bow, as he hurried out of the room. Gendry exhaled, as he could not believe what the last few weeks have had in store for him. Fires roared in the throne room as the remaining lords and ladies filled their seats, facing where the accused would stand. The sun was setting, as seen behind what remained of the Iron Throne. Lord Tyrion addressed the crowd and ordered the accused brought before the king. Cersei was well dressed, though her feet and hands were loosely shackled. Arya escorted her to the same seat Tyrion had once occupied. Prior to being seated, Cersei glared at Sansa and her brother as Davos introduced the king. Cersei then shivered at the mention of the name Baratheon. A slight growl was heard from Nymeria as Cersei looked her way, and then to Arya's smug grin. Gendry took his throne as the rest of the crowd took their seats. Arya continued to stand at Cersei's left. Her Kingsguard armor was light and modest. Gendry loved seeing her in a creation of his own design. Tyrion cleared his throat and read the charges aloud. You stand accused of the murder of your late husband, conspiracy to commit that murder, and the murder of the Tyrell family, and all others occupying the Sept of Baelor, Tyrion continued. The unlawful arrest and beheading of Eddard Stark, and the conspiring to deny the throne to Robert Baratheon's rightful heir, Tyrion finished.
How do you answer these charges?
Asked Sansa. A long silence filled the throne room. Cersei only spoke when Arya shifted her weight.
Guilty,
said Cersei softly. Tyrion leaned forward in his chair. I'm sorry? He asked.
Guilty? Isn't that what I'm supposed to say? The accused has the right to defend herself and call any potential witnesses that may provide rebuttal testimony,
answered Sansa. King Gendry patiently waited Cersei's answer.
What I did, however cruel, however distasteful, was always to protect my family, my children,
said Cersei as she clenched her swelling belly. So how would you then explain the cruelty to that same family you claimed to love so much? Asked Tyrion with direct malice. Cersei turned her head to avoid Tyrion's eye. Arya unsheathed Frost and used its tip to direct Cersei's face back towards her brother. Tyrion climbed halfway down the steps. He wanted to see the emotion swelling in her eyes. Not surprising to him, it was the same hateful glare he had always seen. Tyrion's shoulders slumped as he turned to address the king.
Tysha wasn't a whore. Jaime lied to you.
Tyrion slowly twisted his neck to meet the eyes of his sister. Her overtly satisfied grin immediately caused doubt to overtake his own thoughts. Carefully, Tyrion turned back towards the king and addressed him, while obviously his thoughts dwelled elsewhere. Your Grace, the accused admits to her crimes. I recommend we proceed to the sentencing phase, recommended Tyrion reluctantly. In accordance with the king's law, the majority of the 3 judges will determine the accused's sentence, claimed Tyrion. Gendry rose from his throne to address Cersei, as Tyrion proceeded back to his seat. Cersei Lannister, began King Gendry. Cersei rose to meet the king's eye. Tyrion noticed something different in her face. It was soft, almost kind, as she peered at Gendry. You have admitted guilt on all charges, Gendry paused. Tyrion was intently focused on his sister as she began to hum. Tyrion thought this odd as he looked to Arya's questioning face. Tyrion subtly nodded at Arya, and she let Cersei continue. The king seemed lost in thought as Cersei began to sing quietly. It was a song most mothers knew by heart, and Gendry stumbled over his own words, enough that he abandoned them completely. He slowly climbed down the stairs and approached Cersei. Arya gently placed herself between Gendry and Cersei. Her song became quieter and softer the closer Gendry approached. Gendry's face was blank as he closely stared at her. Arya's puzzled look shifted between Cersei and Gendry. The king abruptly turned and quickly trotted up the stairs. In no way will I condone my sentence to influence the decision of the other judges, Gendry demanded. Sansa quickly nodded, and Tyrion agreed. Cersei Lannister, I sentence you to life in prison, said Gendry, almost embarrassed. Whispers filled the crowd, and Nymearia's growling continued. Gendry sat upon his throne with a look of shock across his face. Sansa Stark then quickly rose from her chair.
Cersei Lannister, I sentence you to immediate public beheading,
spat Sansa. Cersei then turned to her brother, Tyrion. He reluctantly rose from his seat. It's ironic, that your fate now rests in my hands, Tyrion paused. Life is still full of these little ironies, Tyrion continued. Cersei Lannister, I sentence you to die, but grant you a stay of execution until after your child is born, said Tyrion remorsefully. Cersei wailed and covered her mouth, trying to mask her emotion. Cersei simply mouthed,
Thank you.
to her little brother. It was perhaps the kindest word she had ever said to him. Sansa then turned to the king.
Your Grace, may I amend my sentence?
Asked Sansa, and King Gendry agreed. Sansa now addressed Cersei directly.
The child you carry is not guilty of the crimes of its mother.
Sansa began. She rose and walked down to Cersei, as the other two judges did before her.
You are sentenced to death, and it will be carried out promptly after your child's birth.
Sansa paused and looked at Arya.
By direwolf.
Sansa spat with great satisfaction. Cersei grinned at her with measured loathing.
The wolf you once sentenced to death will be your end. Life is indeed full of ironies. You will not know your child's name. You will never embrace it, and never hear its cries.
Sansa spat, now just mere feet from Cersei.
As the gods bear witness, I will have your eyes and ears removed to ensure this sentence is carried out,
said Sansa, now tears falling from her face. Cersei almost seemed amused as she glared from Sansa to Tyrion.
The child will carry the Lannister name, and will be raised by parents worthy of that name.
Sansa finished.
And who might that be?
Asked Cersei calmly.
Tyrion and Sansa Lannister.
Replied Sansa coldly. Cersei then lunged at Sansa as Arya struck her forearm with frost. Her blade cut Cersei to the bone as the crowd jeered. Sansa regained her composure and climbed the steps as Qyburn began wrapping Cersei's wound. Arya's blade now was under Cersei's chin, forcing her to look upon her judges.
I could have taken your hand, but I've had enough ironies for one trial.
Spat Arya. Tyrion rose from his seat and addressed the king. Your Grace, the sentence of death by direwolf and associated stay of execution is agreeable? Asked Tyrion. King Gendry rose from his throne. For my father, for Lady Sansa's father, so be it, commanded King Gendry. The crowd erupted as Cersei was now allowed to lower her head.